Professor Dot Powers. Professor Dot, thank you very much for joining us, for being here.
Yeah, great. So we're following up on we had a gathering not too long ago. So uh, Buddhism it has an incredible background in very deep psychology that a lot of people, even studying Buddhism in America, don't really have much knowledge about. A lot of people do now. I notice that many more people are familiar with the actual texts that are involved in this are called Yogacara texts. And so there's a long history of looking at the human condition, the human mind, the conditions that we operate in, and how to respond to them, particularly how to respond to them where we can look at the place where we can remain in control of our responses. And so the issue tonight that people particularly wanted to look at was how to observe and be somewhat knowledgeable about the emotions that are arising in the conditions that they find themselves in. So, from a Buddhist view, we find ourselves in a set of conditions that we call that karma, the karmic conditions. That's the totality of conditions that includes gender, culture, language, all the different elements of how we find ourselves in a current set of conditions. And then the question is, what do we do with those conditions? Um, and in order to actually have any freedom within those conditions, we have to first of all develop a set of what many people are familiar with, mindfulness or observation of the mind, to see what our interpretation and reaction to what's occurring, what's happening in our mind that's reacting to those conditions. So in Yogacara, there's a approach that we experience the conditions. There are souls that occur. There's first of all, there's attention. So what what we want to emphasize tonight is that the major problem that we all have in the current world is control over our attention. The only place that we have any potential freedom is in the sense of control over our attention. And if you looked at your daily life now, if you looked at your life overall, you'd have to really evaluate how much control you have over your attention, both in terms of what it's attending to from at contact and sense experience, but also what it's attending to internally in the mental aspects of the mind. Uh, can you see when emotions are arising, thoughts are arising from the interior as reacting to something in the sensations exterior? Can you observe the activity of that arising in your mind? To do that, you have to uh, use some form of meditation or mindfulness to gain a control over the being taken over very quickly by what's arising. What's arising, whether emotions, thoughts, or whatever, is going to happen habitually because you've already created the habitual mind that's going to respond to the conditions. And so you're not going to be able to control the conditional mind. You're not going to be able to control the emotions that arise. You're not going to be able to control oftentimes the thoughts that arise. But you can, if you observe really carefully, and many of you are familiar with this and probably practice this, you can actually observe um, the interpretation or reaction that's occurring, and particularly where your attention is in the arisal of conditions. So if an emotion arises, as they often do from either association with a sense experience or something that's arising just randomly in the mind from sitting around and having emotions arise. The question isn't that those arose, because that's already emotion. The question is, how do you attend to them? And so, from a Buddhist view, there is an opportunity if you can develop your mindfulness and your stillness and mindfulness that you can observe the arisal with, there's an opportunity to choose to grasp onto or not grasp on to any emotion or thought that arises. And so, in this sense, the question of where your attention is and the control you have over attention is the primary attribute you need to have any freedom or control over the flow of the habits you've created from the past. And this happens at contact, meaning at each moment of sense experience and each moment of a thought or emotion arising. Then it arises up in the mind takes it up. It takes it up and attaches to it, thinks about it, grasps onto it. And from that, there's a sensation, feeling, there's a feeling of pleasurable or displeasurable that arises from that. And then from that pleasure or displeasure, there's thoughts that rise around that. And from that thoughts that arise from that, then there's intention. There's a movement of the mind of intention towards. So the critical issue is um, being able to observe the process, how in every thought we have, those 5 factors are involved, and observe how those 5 factors determine whether you have a freedom to experience the current experience in a different way than you've habitually experienced it in the past. Once you set up a pattern of reaction of a certain sort, it's very highly likely that there'll be a continuation of emotional reaction in the same way that you had in the past. And going back and examining it doesn't really help that much with it, because examining it oftentimes brings up those emotions again and just starts repeating a lot of those emotional and thoughts related to those emotions. And in the world today, where the world is coming at us at an incredible rate and taking over our attention in every way, that if we feel like we want to have some control over our lives and our mental processes, the first thing that we have to do is be able to observe where our attention is focused and begin to create space, as many of you here are already doing, create space through being still, allowing the conscious awareness to still itself, allow it to be at peace and quiet. It turns out that from a Buddhist view, the basic nature of humans is a peaceful, aware, clear, concentrated, focused mind. So we need to get back to that natural state of mind. If we can get back to that natural state of mind, we can then use that mind to observe what's arising. Now, the problem is what has been set in motion from the past will still arise. So you don't change your life in any kind of automatic way by that insight. Even having very quiet, still moments that you can pay attention with and turn your attention to observing with that kind of stillness doesn't immediately change the conditions. And this is what's super frustrating from everybody that's trying to cultivate, is that no matter how much insight you have in the moment and freedom you have in the moment, by bringing your attention to a mindful observation, you have to realize that you're going to have to wait through the process of changing the habituation of your mind over time. And that's going to be different for every person. So there's no way that 2 people are going to have the same experience of that. These seeds that have been planted from your attention in the past that now are the habitual basis of your ongoing experience, that your experience is this constant habitual river of past experiences that are now being conjured up in every sense experience. And by association arising to the mind, that's the river of existence that's going on and on that you're calling your moment to moment experience. So the really frustrating thing is that you have to have a tremendous amount of patience. You have to believe that if I spend enough time in a little bit more still, aware, concentrated focus, if I give it enough time, eventually I have to have faith that I'll begin to be able to transform that habitual process and change the seeds, the emotions and thoughts and so forth that I planted there over time. And I can't expect it to happen overnight. I have to wait through these as they arise and wait through the process of transformation. The first step of that, though, for everyone, no matter who they are, is getting control over the attention. And in the modern world, clearly, the chaos of the modern world starts not from the chaos externally, but from the lack of control over your attention. So the question you have to ask yourself every morning, if you actually want to change, if you actually want to transform to a more controlled, peaceful, clear mind, you're going to have to get control of your attention. And the problem is in doing that, you're going to have to pull away from a lot of the things that currently you're making contact with. Because every time you make contact with a sense experience, it overwhelms the sense experiences and creates a reaction from that that usually is habitual in some kind of way. When you pull yourself off of that, there's withdrawal, there's boredom, there's I'm missing something, there's all kinds of other kinds of emotions that arise when you try to pull yourself off of what that attention, because right now the attention is habituating an avoidance of deeper levels of emotions that you're actually covering with what you're paying attention to now. You're usually being entertained or taken up by something to avoid another emotional thing that's hard to deal with in some kind of way. So your attention is actually avoidance. So when you get rid of that attention to the avoidance is, you're not going to immediately go to a peace of mind. You're going to go to whatever those emotions and the other elements that you're avoiding are. So you have to endlessly be patient in a process of continually trusting your own mind and your own attention to, as it slowly waits out and allows a transformation of your past habituation, there'll be gradually, by putting wholesome seeds and slowly not paying attention to the things that are causing negative emotions and so forth, the ones that are causing positive, like, for instance, a good example is moving from constantly having desires and greed for things that you want that you can't have or you wish you had and you don't have. Move the mind to generosity and gratitude. This is the first Paramitam Buddhism. The first move towards changing and transforming is having thoughts and actions of generosity, which offset the mind that's constantly feeling like it's missing something because it wants something that it doesn't have. And so the generosity, the seeds of generosity, create a different history of mind that arises in the future present than the constant desire that isn't being met that sets a whole different set of history of seeds arising in the present. So the purpose of your attention is not only to bring a kind of insightful present, is to use that insightful present to transform the past as it's arising so that the future as it arising takes on a different kind of tone, a different kind of feeling over time from changing the habituation of it. So uh, that's a couple of words that gives a structure of a conversation. I think with that, maybe did you want to take us through a couple of situations or issues that we could kind of think that through with?
Yes, that sounds great. So, we asked our attendees to give us some questions that they have in mind, and we found a topic that it was a little bit popular, and it was this feeling of being inadequate. And it will, I mean, I think that is very reasonable feeling, something that a lot of people can um, feel related to. And there are many places in which right now there is like so much information and so much competition. There we are just so many people um, we might feel inadequate in social media. We might feel inadequate in our family, in our jobs, in school. And maybe we can take one of those specific contexts and go through it. What about if we pick a feeling inadequate in at your job, for example?
Or like relationship, which is more, more important. Because
Okay.
relationship is jobs, they come and go, but being part of a relationship is critical to our health, to our mental health. So, whether it's a friendship or whatever, how do we retain friendships, and how does this work to relate to friendship? So, well, first of all, we have to realize that in the entire culture, the entire capitalism is trying to make us feel inadequate. That's how everything is sold. Everything is sold and the goal of the culture is to make us productive, to work for other people, for the culture in general, to work to produce stuff or services or something for the culture. And so the way the culture works is it preys off of our inadequacy. And that inadequacy goes back to early childhood. Very early child, we feel very vulnerable in early childhood. We have a lot of vulnerability, and we have a lot of, as we start off in life, we have no idea what's going on. And we have to then construct a reality for ourselves from our experience. And so the whole system preys off of that. And so we have to, first of all, we have to realize that, and realize that, first of all, in terms of observing what's going on, we have to see that it's up to us, it's up to us and only we, each of us in our own experience, can find a level of confidence, not in our productivity, not in what we look like, not in the what we're selling of ourselves, not in how many people hit on us, not how many, in every kind of way that we're evaluating ourselves now is within a context uh, of some sort of commercial trade of something for something. It's all some sort of, we have to go back to realize that every moment of any actual security that we're going to have is going to happen within our own minds, within ourselves, with our own sense of uh, realizing that everything that we're experiencing is at some point being interpreted in ourselves, that we're interpreting what's occurring. And in our interpretation, we're setting up our entire life of reaction is coming from our interpretation. So we have to find the place in our experience where we observe that interpretation happening. We have to bring our attention to that interpretation. And we have to see how that the interpretation of what's happening, we have to have a positive sense of the potentiality of, that since we're interpreting, we ultimately could be free of this constant external judgment if we could only see the process by which our interpretation has been set into motion to have a negative sense of ourselves, and realize that negativity is something that we're allowing to continue through the way that we pay attention. So if we take that to a relationship, I mean, what we want out of relationship is we first of all want attention. And the reason that we want attention is that whole striving of that early lacking in life that we're trying to create a narrative to get attention for. That whole thing is to getting attention to reinforce ourselves in whatever narrative we've created to try to exist within. And so there's a kind of uh, transactional element in that. So if we could see that what relationship actually starts when we deeply attend to and listen to the other person's experience of themselves, not our interpretation of their experience, not our judgment of their experience, not our projection of their experience, but an actual deep listening to the actual experience of the other person as they experience themselves, then they're being actually listened to is basically the fundamental, most important element of any kind of exchange, any kind of relationship. And by that deeply listening, that kind of deep attention to another person, it allows you to the other person then can not only feel that kind of attention, which is really profound, but you can actually leave your own projections of yourself, your own thoughts about yourself in terms of what you're projecting, and open up your heartfulness, your mindfulness, and attend to something beyond the story you're telling that you're constantly caught up in the narrative of yourself. So again, it's a question of where you put your attention. If the attention is on your own needs, projections, and so forth, there's no way for that attention to actually go to actually looking towards and into the other person's experience of themselves. And just in that moment of doing that, there's an actual, not only transformation, but a kind of transcendence out of your own narrative. And already there's a kind of empowerment in even being able to leave yourself and listen to someone else. And when you do that, the experience of the other person, that the one thing that is not replaceable, all of our traits are all tradable for other people's traits. But this deep listening is not tradable because somebody that will, people that will, if we could actually do that with each other, we're really looking to the freedom, to really reinforcing the true spirit and freedom of the other person. The other person feels affirmed in every moment of that, and we get past all of our um, selling of trading traits that we're going to trade with each other, and then there's some sort of almost like there's a sort of balance between us of the different things we trade off to each other. So again,
Right.
it comes back to a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. So I don't know. I just throw that out.
I was wondering because I hear what you're saying, and I feel like this past segment is something that we can start training over time. But I was thinking, I was wondering if you have some advice in like a much more shorter term. I'm thinking like what can we do when we are in this emotional turmoil? When we are feeling, for example, anxious or fear, specifically for this inadequacy, um, what do we do? Do we need to calm down and then look back at the situation and then work through it? Or do you have some advice while we are in this turmoility?
Oh, I think the first step is uh, you have to see that whatever emotion and whatever's arising is not you. You have to see that who you are is the current moment of awareness is completely free. In its true nature, it's completely free. It doesn't have any real limitations. The only limitations of our awareness is what we put on ourselves from the interpretations that we have. So the first thing is that when emotions arise that seem to be overwhelming, the first step is to realize that it's not me. it's something that's arising from past experiences or in the current experiences. That's an interpretation. And the interpretation is not me. The current biggest problem is that because people have no reference of authority, they've turned to emotions as their only reference of authority. If they want to know what's going on, they believe in their emotions. But emotions are a roller coaster of past experiences and present experiences in terms of a particular interpretation of them. And they're very habitual. And the first step is to experience your awareness of what's going on as the emotion is not me, it's something that's occurring in the present. If I and see the next thing you need to do is you need to actually observe how the emotion only exists through your attention. If you pull your attention away from it, it doesn't exist. The oxygen of emotions is your attention. And as soon as you bring your attention to something else, the oxygen that holds that emotion alive in your consciousness, it just disappears and the balloon shrinks. So where you the, if you can get control over your attention, and that means constantly practicing where that is, what that is, where that is, what that is, and calm that attention down and practice that all the time in good times and bad times. Then, when you're in a situation that has more heavy emotions to it, you have the habit of calming down, observing, not identifying with, and allowing a space for it to pass and a space for you to choose whether you want to continue to take up that emotion as your experience at that moment. Until you're able to learn to choose, to learn to place that the emotion's not me. As soon as you identify with emotion, the game's lost. Because as soon as you think you're the emotion, then where else do you have to go? You then have to, then you're expecting another person to understand that in some kind of way, or you expect yourself to understand how that emotion, you get into then an entire explanation of yourself around that emotion, rather than realize that the emotion itself is something that's just arising to conditions, and that there's actually, to some degree, a choice as to whether you continue your attention on it or not. Now, this is not pushing emotions aside because emotions have a lot of information in them, but it's not grasping onto it. It's letting it just be. And if you just let it be and don't attend to it by grasping and identifying it, I will guarantee you will pass every time. Guaranteed. Because the only oxygen of every emotion is your attention. So I would suggest in a discussion like this, the first step is to begin to get in control of your attention. Don't think that you're just going to solve the problem each time it arises by just calming down somebody. That's a short-term solution. And it's a short-term solution to that afternoon or that day. But it's not an actual long-term solution, because the long-term solution is getting in control of the attention that you then can use as the circumstances arise and see the actual process by which each of these feelings and thoughts and so forth that arise that seem to be who you are, seem to be taking you over, are something that you could just let go of. And if you once you learn that in your own experience, not theoretically, but actually do it yourself, everyone would be absolutely incredibly surprised how much power they have over their own mind. You have to believe that you have a tremendous power over your own experience and your own awareness. And you just you've got to learn how to get in control of that empowerment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that that's very helpful. And we were talking the other day about these steps, how sometimes when you literally like just look into your mind, then you can see how these experiences are. But without further ado, I would like to open the space for other people to ask questions because I think that we now have set up the this field for everyone to um, ask you
I mean, number
things.
one, we have to own our karma. I mean, we are what we're doing right now isn't the fault of someone else. Right now, we're living in an era that everyone's looking to blame something else for your current conditions. You will never find a solution in blaming someone else or anything else. There might be injustice, there's for sure injustice, and there's for sure all kinds of things that we can analyze from the outside in terms of what we in Buddhism we call the conditional existence that we find ourselves in. And we might even want to change that conditional existence. We might even feel compelled to do that, and that might actually be an important thing to do. But we're not talking about that right now, the conditional. We're talking about the place where we exist moment to moment in our actual existence, which is only and ever only in our awareness, in our existential awareness. There's no other place we ever exist. So first of all, we have to recognize that we exist no matter what conditional realms that we are in, that we exist and we're responsible for our state of mind. And we're responsible for what emotions we take up. Now, how do we get to the conditional? By every choice that we made and everything that we attach to. So all of us have totally different conditions. Everybody in this Zoom has totally different conditions based on their past experiences that created those common conditions. And in the Lotus, it suggests that whatever that is for each of us is our path to Buddhahood. I mean, we're right now all in the path to Buddhahood in the realities of the conditions that we're in. That's our current challenge. You can't fake to be something else. Everybody wants to be something else. It doesn't help. You have to do it in the conditions that you're already in, because those are the conditions that you constructed through the interaction of your endless interpretations and experience of what's occurred. So yes, I mean, the first step of this is owning and recognizing that the only person that can do anything about this is you in terms of the internal sense of your emotional life and so forth is going to be something that you're the one that's going to be in control of how you approach. And so that's the first thing, as you mentioned. Then the second thing is you do not repress emotions. Repressing emotions is giving them power. Repressing emotions is actually moving away from the emotion is actually how you actually feel. That's how you actually feel in the moment. And that how you actually feel, if you look at it, you'll see that in almost every case, it's a reaction to the present sense experience based on past experiences. Very rarely is an emotion just a current construction. It's almost all uh, not the present moment in the senses, but an interpretation of the present senses from an experience you've had in the past that by association arises this emotion. So the emotion arises by habit and it's telling you something. It's telling you how you're interpreting this moment. But if at that moment when it arises, you don't make it you, that it's something arising that you're experiencing, that you observe it at a distance from you, then at that distance from you, you can actually see how you can either take it up as an identity again and replant that seed, or let it go and not. If you let it go and don't replant it, then every time you do that, every time something arises in emotion to the present sense experience, that you take it up and don't replant it, that loses its power to come up in the future by exactly how much power that emotion was planted. It's a mechanism. So if it's a very strong emotion that's been very habitual, you just have to realize it's going to take multitudes of times of not responding to take it up before it's going to lose its power to come up by association in another moment in the future. So you're working on two things all the time, two times. You're working on the present awareness of attention, but you're using the present moment of attention to change the future, who you are in the future that's arising to conditions. If you So the mechanism is if you don't respond to a negative emotion that comes up constantly because of an association with sense period, every time that arises, you don't repress it, but you just simply let it go. It's not me. I can let it go. Now you think, oh, if I do that once, that's going to solve it. No, you're going to have to do that as many times as the power of whatever it is that you planted it. And this is why it's extremely important to look at what seeds we're planting. Because you say, well, I can do this today. It doesn't matter. It won't really matter that I do whatever this is. But the problem is that it's not in the present that whatever you're doing that's planting these seeds is going to be the problem. It's going to be the constant future nows that comes up in. And so you can see one afternoon of certain kinds of activities you could spend an entire lifetime trying to claw yourself out of because you're now having to try to wade through an incredibly strong set of emotions that are now arising constantly. And then you have to have this constant patience in the present moment to not attach. So the key is to not repress emotion, fear emotions, allow them to be information that you can observe, but don't identify or attach to them and give them the additional charge of your identification. Because every single emotion, insofar as it has an effect on our habits of awareness, is all planted through our attention and only exist in the present through our attention. They only exist in the native self. But the problem, of course, as you point out, is we planted so many seeds over the course of the time of our that we still own that we're going to have to patiently wait those out, and we can't repress that. There's no way to repress. When we repress that, we're not actually working it through. The only way we can work it through is by facing it as it arises and learning how to not attach to it as it arises and let it take us over once again in the ways that it has in the past. So anyway, that's a thought.
Okay, we have another question from Megan, and it goes, can you say more about what it's like to not be so caught up in strong emotions? What's left after the emotion passes?
Uh, what's left is an incredibly aware, everyone here's basic nature is a contented, aware, uh, like they're able to focus on whatever's arising in the senses in a very focused and a very concentrated way in every moment of experience. So the basic nature is not that this idea of emptiness is not, we're not trying to empty the mind to be empty. We're trying to empty the mind of its habituation so it can be aware. So that it's free to respond to the conditions. Every time a new condition arises, respond to those actually conditions rather than an old habit of reacting to those conditions that isn't even related to those conditions. So as you get rid of the habit of emotion, you free the mind to be alert, aware, to be concentrated, to be focused. It's a completely alive mind. It's not a dead mind. We're not cultivating a dead mind. We're cultivating a totally alive mind that can respond to conditions as they arise with an incredible alertness, a clarity, an understanding, a listening, that every person that we're interacting with, we can pause, attend to, listen to, try to grasp what they're about, what their experience is, try to observe how we project and take up the space of that, and um, our neediness or our habituation then gets in the way of being able to do that. And so what ends up happening is, since we're all living in these karmic conditions, we need to learn to calm the mind of our habits that get in the way of our clarity, and allow the actual clear, focused mind to deal with each condition as it arises, and be alert and aware to what those conditions are specifically. Because it turns out that every moment of our conditional life is in constant change. We're constantly in a new context that requires a different response. And what's happening is, because of our habituation, we're having the same response of emotional reaction time after time, which is usually totally inappropriate to the context of the situation, the condition. So we never have a relationship between being alive existentially to the conditions, because this habituation of ourselves takes over the space of it. Then we defend that, we justify that, and we become a whole a narrative of justification, rationale, and then we're irritated that people don't understand us, that our misinterpretation of the conditions isn't our fault. And you can see, I could just take you step by step by where you get frustrated, irritated. But the fundamental reason for this is because you're carrying old habits and old experiences into the present moment, and you're not alive existentially to the present moment. And if you were alive to it, it's anything but dead. It's alive to every set of conditions. And it turns out that as we move down we're not even talking about this tonight, but as you move down the road of a bodhisattva or a Buddha, the extent of that awareness to conditions expands from the levels of bodhisattvahood. Each level of bodhisattvahood is an expansion of awareness to another level of conditions. And as we move towards Buddhahood, that expansion becomes infinite. We're still in this little realm of our experience. But the entire practice of Buddhism is to expand, to develop this basic mind that then we can expand, because then we can use it to actually respond to existentially differently in every present moment to different sets of conditions. As we do that, the mind expands in its experience. Right now, it's completely limited by our habituation. And our habitual response keeps us in a very narrow range of response. And as I say, unfortunately, it's almost always not really the response to those conditions, because it's a habit of response. It's not really alive, aware of those sets of conditions. So you're not going into a samadhi of emptiness. You're going into a super awareness that has a total flexibility to observing conditions. I don't know if that answered the question, but
But it was great. Probably. So it goes, good evening. I do have a question. I'm an active Buddhist cultivator. Most of the people who are close to me emotionally are not yet. A lot of time I can't stop myself from trying to convince them to accept Buddhism principles or philosophy. Conflicts and frustrations arise then on both sides. I wonder if Dr. Powers has some tips to share. Thank you.
yeah, I never try to talk to anybody in anything about Buddhism. But uh, okay, so it's very important to understand that Buddha was not a philosopher. He wasn't a moralist. He wasn't a religious. He wasn't even religious. He was a physician, a doctor of suffering. Okay. He says, I'm only coming here. When people ask him, well, what did you discover under the Bodhi tree when you were in meditation? He says, I can't talk about it. He says, why? Because if I say any words about it, you're going to turn it into an ism. You're going to take my words and turn them into something and turn it into an ism, and you're going to completely misunderstand the entire point of what I've accomplished here, which doesn't have words, which is beyond words. So the wonderful thing about Buddhism is from the very beginning, the teacher himself said, "Don't take my words to be any ideology or any ism. It's only a pointing to something. And what's it a pointing to? You first of all have to establish with any person talking about Buddhism is, are they having realms that are dissatisfied and have some suffering? If people aren't suffering, then there's no need. We don't You don't need to uh, actually have a physician. If everything's going great and everything's perfect, okay, let it go. What's the problem? What's the problem? We can then we'll great. We'll communicate in your clear mind, whatever you're doing, great. If somebody is suffering, has anxiety or whatever, and seems to be difficult in control, then oh, the first thing you have to do is establish with them the same sense of the causes and the world of that suffering. Before you can even say a word about anything about Buddhism, you have to establish the same uh, the same description of our experience together of the world. If we can have a same description of the world, then you could find the skillful means maybe to use a Buddhist principle, but never use it as a Buddhist principle. Use it as the actual idea itself, actually apply to the person's the nature of their suffering. You don't have to use any Buddhist terminology at all. So don't use Buddhist terminology. First of all, establish a common way to understand the world with a certain kind of language. Be in communion with that person first. You can't teach anything about Buddhism without, first of all, establishing a communion of relationship, that we have common understanding of the world we're experiencing. And then you have to talk within that common world, and it has to be, I have found that in situations like that, I have done this. And it's worked a lot of times, sometimes it doesn't work. You don't even suggest that they use it. You just say, I myself have used this once in a while. And then, more important than anything else, the only thing that anyone believes about anything is what they've actually manifested. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, your authority only rests on your ability to take those principles and make a real transformation of who you are in other people's experience. So you can meditate forever. If in the process of that you aren't a little more open, not a little bit more generous, not a little bit more something different than what you were before through the transformation of that can actually be seen and felt and experienced by the other person. Who cares? We can talk philosophically forever about anything. We can be absolutely right about anything. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters, the only thing that will make any difference is if you can make those transformations yourself that make a difference, because that should in itself make you a better friend. And what they should experience you as a Buddhist is a better friend. The only thing about being a Buddhist for a friend is, are you a better friend? Not that you're a Buddhist. And if you can show better friendship, if you can show a person that has different traits and that other people can experience, a more focused, concentrated, attentive, generous sort of person, then people are going to be interested and intrigued. In itself, it doesn't mean that they would necessarily, but at least they'll see that the transformation is real. People only believe the reality of your existence, they don't believe anything else. Sorry.
Thank for what? That was great.
That's asking a lot. I mean, I'm sorry because to actually make a real transformation is difficult. It's easy to have thoughts. It's easy to have ideas. It's even easy to meditate and be really still. I mean, even meditating and be, sit for 4 hours a day and be really still is relatively easy compared to an actual transformation that actually gets brought into the world and actually then interacts with other people and deals with all the issues and problems and conditionality of the world, taking what you've learned from that meditation and putting it into practice and being different. Because sitting, you're not tested. You're just sitting. You're testing your own self, your own mind, your own body. But that doesn't mean anything in the Mahayana until you can take it into the real world and practice it in the actual conditions. And that's really hard. I mean, it's really hard. So to make to make that the main way that you can bring Buddhism in this world is through your own internal transformation that you can bring out into the world as a real difference in yourself makes the bar pretty high. And that's what I'm sorry for is the bar has to be so high. It'd be nice if you could just have good principles. And if you just speak good principles, that's enough. But in Buddhism, the good principles isn't almost anything because we can talk all kind of good principles. At the end of the day, you're still an irritated, asshole. So who gives a shit? I mean, what what does it matter? Okay, we can talk. So I'm afraid that in trouble, the trouble with this approach of you actually have to, it actually has to go from practice to transformation and then take it into the real world, prime time. And if you can take it into prime time with actual transformation, people will be interested and they will be intrigued and you can have communication about your experience. But but we have to say over and over again, the only authority that you actually have with other people is your own life and your own transformation. Any other authority, you're using power in some kind of way. You're using other people's neediness. You're using your own, some kind of traits you have in some kind of way. It isn't a freely given. The only valuable relationship is freely given. And for it to be freely given, you have to actually have the consistency, the clarity, the listening, the character that deserves. You have to deserve the freely given attention. And so, to deserve the freely given attention, there has to be a real transformation of certain aspects of what we bring to it. I can guarantee that anyone that actually can bring about that transformation and bring that into the real world of exchange would begin to transform the world around them, of the friends, the world around them through that transformation of their own, embodiment. So
I think that those are amazing final thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, Doug, as always.